we have a panel on streaming and bundling. So even before the pandemic, we were talking about streaming wars, which Kevin actually said were overrated. So we should get into that in this panel. And we've been talking about pay TV bundles, how they might evolve for years. But the pandemic stuck us all at home and measures of streaming all accelerated. This burst in popularity raises a number of questions. How many streaming services will consumers be willing to pay for? Or as our own Jane Creel succinctly put it, how many freaking streaming services am I going to have to buy? Who are the winners and losers likely to be? What does it mean for the future of the traditional TV pay bundle? We'll discuss all of these things and more. Remember to ask your questions on Slido. Let me introduce the panelists quickly, and then we'll get started. So again, Laura Martin now becomes a panelist, and will be giving us her opinions instead of asking questions. She's a senior analyst of entertainment, cable, and media at Needham and Company. Rahul Telang is a Trustees Professor of Information Systems at Heinz College at Carnegie Mellon University. Andrew Wallenstein, President and Chief Media Analyst of Variety Intelligence Platform. And Ali Yurukoglu, who's an Associate Professor of Economics at the Stanford University Graduate School of Business. Welcome to all of you. So let me start off with the basic question, the first question, one that Jane posed. How many streaming services are viable?
I think we're, to use the favorite media metaphor, early innings. I think we're not even in the top of the first, I think, in terms of the landscape that we've got out there. And it's pretty crowded. We've got a lot of players, and there's still more to come. I think we're going to see Discovery come into this space. I think CBS has a bigger move to make when they introduce Paramount Plus. And no, I don't believe they will all coexist. I do believe there will be winners and there will be losers. I also think it's not necessarily kind of a zero-sum game. I think, for instance, there will be certainly room for multiple entrants, but we also need to think of them in terms of what a new bundle could look like, where there will be more optionality, but the average subscriber, the average consumer will take a Netflix, which may be at a high price point, but then add a smaller bundle or two or three to that. And this entire landscape, I think, will be shifting and evolving for many years to come as we get to a new place.
Do you have a sense of what sort of the equilibrium number of services will be?
I don't, simply because I think the pricing is going to change for a lot of these. And so if an HBO Max is currently out there at what I think is a way too high sum, it's possible they could course correct and do a smaller, cheaper product that is meant to be more as an adjunct to a Netflix as opposed to going head to head with a Netflix. And I just think it's going to take years for all of this to sort through.
Yeah, so my feeling is that the streaming world or the streaming companies, there's going to be significant differentiation. Right now, what we are seeing is basically the same type, the same genre, the same model. They are basically same. I have a feeling that over time, we will see differentiation and people will subscribe to a bundle of complementarity. So somebody will be good in maybe comedy, somebody will be good in sports, somebody will be good in something else. And that will allow people to subscribe to maybe more than one, I would say more than two platforms. Right now, because they are basically substitute. So there's no point somebody subscribing to a Netflix and then go ahead and get HBO Max, because they are competing in the same space. So I have a feeling that over time, we will see more differentiation where the firms will not be copying each other. And I think that will play out.
So would that end up looking more like a traditional TV bundle where people could choose a sports package, for example?
I don't know how the thing is going to play out because the platform, at some level is not like TV channel, because the platform themselves are basically a single TV channel. So they're not like a one particular channel. They are basically a cable. So if somebody subscribes to Netflix, they get the huge number of programs that are inbuilt. Will they be able to subscribe to, say, Disney, or will they be able to subscribe to HBO Max? And they're offering basically, again, a huge bundle of programs. So at some level, you're right. If you think of this platform as a channel, then one would like to subscribe to a bunch of channels. But these platforms are almost like a cable package. They're not just one channel. They're already a collection of bunch of programs. And I think that makes it a little bit more difficult than how the whole thing will play out.
Laura, what do you think about that? You've been studying streaming for a while now. Do these comments ring true to you, or not?
So I think we have to put it in a bigger context of, let's call it consumer attention, which was one of the TPI panels yesterday. And we really need to take sort of Kevin's panel, which was the one right before this, into account about user-generated content. I think that the linear TV bundle will persist for 50% of Americans at the end of the day. Video games are really taking a lot of share for and user-generated content. Like Snap will tell you 90% of kids under 25 and 75% of kids, people under 35 use Snap every day, 7 times a day. And video games, similar, 50 and 70% depending on gender. So all of these compete with streaming, and now streaming, so linear TV, video games, user-generated content are competing with streaming. Streaming generally is thought of as premium content. Linear, like video on demand, but then you watch 30 minutes or the 90-minute movie. Those then compete within AVOD, so advertiser-supported free to consumers, which no one's mentioned yet, which I think is really important. And SVOD, which is Jane's question, which is how many subscription services do I need to subscribe for? All the data shows that during COVID, depending on what country you are, the number of services has gone up, of subscriptions, by 1 to 2, sort of depending on country. Big arguments in my world about subscription fatigue. My opinion is we will have subscription fatigue, and people will pivot within streaming to more AVOD, more free content that you can watch. Old James Bond. I'm watching all the old Sherlock Holmes with Basil Roth. They're all free. So I think we need to talk AVOD versus SVOD, and then those within the context of consumer attention. And that sort of breaks the prism is this SVOD argument we're having isn't actually that consequential. Whether people are going to have 3 services or 5 isn't that consequential from an economic or consumer resonance point of view. It's a bigger issue than that, in my opinion.
So, Ali, actually, that seems kind of consistent with what I think you've thought, which is that we're kind of at an equilibrium level of what people are kind of willing to spend, and that we're going to sort of see it all rearrange into something that we already had, although maybe that's not the right way to put it.
Yes, that's correct. So my predictions, there will be aggregation, and eventually we're going to end up at a place where people will subscribe to multiple streaming services, but the billing will be through a single, and the billing and interface will be through a single firm, whoever is good at making the software to do that. I think one good juxtaposition to think about is compared to music. Right now we have this sort of tying between who's making the programming. They also have their own interface and billing for that programming on the streaming services. It'd be like if instead of Spotify, you subscribe to the Sony Music streaming service and the Universal Music streaming service. I don't think it makes sense to do things that way. I think there will be ultimately one service you subscribe to. There might be multiple options for that service, and who deals with the programmers to license the content onto that service and gives you nice recommendation systems and interfacing. And I think that's just, and what that ends up being is like the old traditional cable bundle, just with better interface for consumers.
Rahul, is that consistent with what you had been saying?
It's possible, but I'm not sure that we can have one company or one firm which can provide the interface for a bunch of streamers, because I don't know how the money will flow. Will that company take the share? will they extract some rent because they are providing the user an ability to switch between Netflix, between HBO Max, between Peacock? So how the money will take place actually will play a role. I think I agree with the point that eventually user would like these multiple options, just like cable TV has, that somebody can seamlessly switch between one versus the other. As long as the money remains reasonable, that thing will work out. But I'm a little skeptical that will there be a one company who will do this, and whether these Netflix or HBO Max will basically allow them to be quote unquote bundled within the one company framework. So that is a little unsure, but I think that idea, something along that line will happen.
I think it already has to some degree. I'm sorry to jump in.
No, please do.
I don't know if you guys noticed, I think it was maybe just a month ago, look at what Apple announced with Apple One. This kind of goes back to what Laura was saying about the broader consumer framework. Apple One any day now is going to be out in the marketplace offering, there's a number of bundles between $15 to $30 that will bring together TV, music, video games, news, fitness. So I do think we're going to see more of that. I do think Amazon to some degree already provides similar bundles. And I have a feeling that's where this market is going to go. And that Laura's correct in saying we're maybe looking at it a little too small in terms of just focusing on one subset. I would say that there's a broader bundle war that we are probably not even have begun to experience yet, where we could see Apple, Amazon, Google, maybe even, I don't know, Facebook come with these multiple different kinds of entertainment and even beyond entertainment consumption. And that's where this all goes.
So you actually, I know that, oh, sorry, Laura, go ahead.
Now, let me build on Andrew's comments. So I really like your Apple Premium One example. It's perfectly builds on the prior two speakers. What I would say is today, when you look at the Amazon Prime user interface and Roku's, you go there and you have the ability on line 3 to subscribe for BritBox or these specialty SVOD services. And so they aren't bundled, but they are aggregated already on Amazon Prime. And so the bundle is you're exactly right. Apple's doing the big bundle, and I think those are going to get bigger. But I also think this notion of aggregating in one place all the things you subscribe for and do, 7 days free or 30 days free, those are already being aggregated because Amazon Prime and Roku get 30% of the revenue if you subscribe on their aggregation platform. So they're incented to push those SVOD services towards you because they get revenue shares from that.
So ultimately, everyone subscribes to Amazon or Roku or whoever has put together whatever collection of things that they like.
Roku is predominantly an AVOD free streaming service, but I'm just saying the bundle, before the bundle, maybe we get to this intermediary step where at least they're all in the same place. They're aggregated in the same place. I don't think the billing is the same. I think the billing is still separated. I'm not sure.
On Comcast and other cable providers, you can interface with Netflix and Amazon through your cable box. So I think that's very close to what we're describing here.
Andrew, I know you have some statistics you'd like to show. And so if you'd like to share your screen, just let everybody know that once you stop sharing your screen, they're going to have to repin all of our boxes back. So it's a Zoom world. Everyone's used to this sort of thing. So, but
still telling me that
feel free.
I'm still being told host disabled attendee screen sharing. So
okay, well, hopefully they'll fix that. And yeah.
Just to set up for a second, the data I wanted to show was actually just about the subscriber VOD subset. So maybe okay. At a different juncture.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Laura, in your interview with Kevin, he said that the streaming wars were overrated. I mean, we didn't go into details about that, but what do you think he meant, or do you agree with that or disagree with that in some way? I mean, it's a little unfair to argue with him since he's not here now, but it was sort of an interesting comment and a response, I thought.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I probably wouldn't have used that word because like I said, my answer would have been Disney Plus for streaming wars.
Mm-hmm.
I would have picked a winner. But he said overrated. I do think a little bit about Kevin is a longtime member of both Disney, which is like the preeminent media company, and now TikTok, which is, I would call it, one of the preeminent user generated content companies. I think the streaming wars really. I think the streaming wars are about an in-home big television argument, and 70% of time spent is on a smartphone. So again, if you sort of are trying to run a bigger business in media, it's about attracting traffic and then elongating attention. And some of these business models for like Snap and YouTube and TikTok really have much lower costs of content. And therefore they have much bigger upsides if you get them right than traditional media. So there's billions of dollars being spent on content, but it's totally a premium content, but it's totally unclear it will ever make money. So I think that's what he's thinking about, and that's what I would be thinking about.
It's interesting. You said you're trying to elongate people's attention, but it seems like we've done that by going to short form video, or at least those companies did. And Andrew, you wrote about short form video at least as early as 2017, maybe earlier, when, of course, at the time, we were talking about what happened with Quibi. So I guess the first question then would be, what made you see that coming? And the other is, what happened to Quibi?
Let's start second first. I mean, and I'm not one of the haters. I respect Jeffrey Katzenberg and what he tried to do, but it's clear that the business model that he attempted was doomed from the start. There simply wasn't a market that was willing to pay for premium short form content. And I think to some degree, it's because short form content is really a user generated, culture driven kind of thing. It comes from the masses making their own content. I think you're seeing that in the biggest way on TikTok right now. And of course, that continues to some degree on YouTube and Instagram and other platforms as well. I don't think that's going away anytime soon, but my own theory is that what Jeffrey tried to do, no one's going to crack that nut. That short form premium content simply isn't a thing.
So it really wasn't, the problem, it was just the whole business model was flawed. It wasn't that they could have executed better or anything like that.
I'd actually love to hear other people's opinion on that. I've kind of given my own.
Who else?
So Scott, you mentioned about pandemic and the growth in all these services. My feeling is that eventually everything has to go back to the fundamental. That is, are the services providing the value that customers care about? And if they're not, they will fail. If they are, they will probably go ahead. The only benefit that the pandemic has provided, it has given opportunity for these companies to sell their services, products a little bit more aggressively because people have time and they're willing to explore all the options. And maybe something will stick and maybe something will take off. A silly example could be Zoom. Nobody thought much of Zoom. It was already there, but not at this level. But now that we have been using Zoom in different forms, I can easily imagine that after the pandemic is over, Zoom will still continue to, if not grow at the same rate, it will still grow. I can imagine that Zoom will become the part of the conversation for all the business meetings, for the conferences. It might even reduce the travel. So what I'm saying is that the pandemic has given chances to many companies, products, and services to come to the user attention. And if some of them might stick, they might take off, but there's no guarantee that they will, like Quibi. It basically failed.
So I would say Quibi got unlucky because it was a mobile first type of content. I do think that I think the business model of paying for premium content is really hard when who you're competing with is TikTok or Snap, where the users make all the content, Facebook. I mean, these are companies that you build a platform, it is globally scalable, and there's zero cost of content. So if you're Quibi, even outside, like they would have had a better chance in a normalized world for sure. But they'd spent they raised $1.7 billion to do short form video in a time frame where TikTok came from nowhere and became huge on basically zero cost of content. Billions of dollars of investment, in fairness, but completely scalable. So it's too bad it failed. I think it was a worthy experiment, just a really expensive one.
Why would they have had a better?
Because
why would they have had a better chance during more normal times?
Right, and so this goes to one of the reasons I sort of think a lot of what Netflix is telling us, and I agree with, is a lot of the pandemic excess consumption of video content in home reverts post-pandemic when we go back to ours. So I don't think some of our media consumption retains its same form, because Quibi was mobile first and no one was leaving home because of lockdowns. It didn't have a competitive advantage on a smartphone if you could watch the last 13 James Bonds on your big TV, which was eating up a lot of your time. So it would have done better in a normalized environment where, you were outside more on a mobile phone and looking for premium content on a mobile phone.
I want to disagree a little bit with that.
Okay.
Because in a way, I think the pandemic actually did Quibi a favor, in the sense that I think Quibi was going to fail no matter what. And it failed quicker as a result of the pandemic and saved a lot more money getting burned through for no reason. That's really my take.
Totally interesting. I mean, it failed in the end. We just knew in 6 months, which is...
Right. Otherwise, it would have dragged on for 2 or 3 years. It would have been a much slower, more expensive death.
I mean, this is all part of, some of this is part of, I guess as an economist, we'd say defining the market and, who's taking time away from who and who actually competes with whom, and whether user-generated content, how well it competes with premium content. And Lee, you've noted that, you think there'll always be a market for premium content. And am I right that you think sort of user-generated content really doesn't compete well with it?
No, I don't want to say that user-generated content doesn't compete well with it. I mean, I've noticed my own consumption patterns. I used to watch TV at night. Now I sort of flip through TikTok at night. What I did say is it won't eradicate. I think there's always going to be a market for high value production, where the talent really invests a lot in developing their craft, and will get paid for that.
So Laura and Andrew, do you how do you view this competition between user-generated content and premium content? I mean, we've talked sort of loosely about how one competes with the other, but is there any evidence that UGC is crowding out premium content yet, or are we still, just because everybody's home, there's more time total that's being put into everything, every streaming platform?
I would just say there's room for everybody. I think what you just said last, that the rising tide of the pandemic lifts all different kinds of boats, is true. But I think both markets can coexist. It's my own feeling.
And I think my opinion is that you guys at TPI have defined it properly, which is it's about consumer attention, and shelf space. The limit in shelf space is consumer time. And therefore, as I sort of posited in my first comment, I think we need to put video games. I think we need to put user generated. I think we need to put all forms of streaming services and linear. They are all competing in the media/leisure time space. But Facebook would be in there too. I mean, anything a consumer does with time is competing for consumer attention and time, and therefore monetizable. You only have an option to make $1 from a consumer if he's engaged with your product first.
By the way, who notices that more often than anyone else? It's Reed Hastings. There is not a quarterly call where he does not address that broader framework. As recently as earlier this week, when he was discussing the third quarter, what did he mention as sort of a competitive threat? The return of live sports to linear TV. Mm-hmm. So the guys who are running these big platforms, whether they're Netflix, whether they're HBO, whether they're TikTok, they're looking at this in such a broad way. It's not about just that immediate competitive set.
Can I add one thing? Is I think there is definitely a dimension of competition, but there's also huge complementarities. You know, your presence on TikTok or Instagram will raise your viewership for your sort of longer form content. So I think it's sort of what we call a co-opetition type framework, where yes, they're competing for time, but in some important ways, they reinforce each other.
Well, the thing I'd add on building on that comment is a lot of times consumers do two things at once. Mm-hmm. They are watching an SVOD or an AVOD on their big screen, and they're also on TikTok on their smartphone in front of them. So one of the things that's happened with mobile phone adoption is we've gotten more windows of time. Time has become bigger. Shelf space wasn't fixed at 24 hours a day. Media consumption has, in many respects, has doubled if people are on two screens simultaneously.
But that doesn't double the total value, though, right? Because you can't be consuming two things at, I don't know how you measure attention exactly, but if you're paying attention to two things, doesn't that make each one less valuable to an advertiser?
I'm not sure that's true. I'd be comfortable taking the other side of that argument, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like take the debate last night. I'm sure many people were scrolling through Twitter while they watched the debate.
That's true. Good point. Yeah. Does music figure into this? I mean, that sounds to me like something that where you are, where it's more natural to divide your attention, right? You're listening to music and doing something else.
I mean, I feel like in the music, there's a sort of equilibrium in the sense that Spotify has become the big gorilla and all the labels are perfectly okay with that. The customers are okay with that. And it's just a question of how can you get the Spotify to promote your own album? If people know that the major way the musician and the artist make money now is by concerts. So they want to get famous, they want to be well known on Spotify, but they realize that Spotify is not the way they can make money. Unlike CD, where CD was the major way, the major artists could make money. With the Spotify, that monetary incentives are lower, but I believe that Spotify will get the artists the recognition that will give them an opportunity to go to concerts and make money. So unlike the movies where you see the streaming war, in the music, I don't see much. I don't see a big competition coming to Spotify.
So that's actually kind of interesting, comparing music streaming to video streaming. It seems like some of the, I don't know if it's exactly conventional wisdom, but people think that each video platform needs original content to compete, and certainly Netflix and others are spending a huge amount of money to do that. And that is not at all the case with music, right? They all try to have exactly the same content. Why are these two things different?
I wouldn't look at it that way if you're Spotify. Spotify, if you look at its evolution, has clearly decided that, music was sort of the date it brought to the dance, but now podcasting is where it's at. That's where the momentum and growth is going to be. And I think there's an even bigger opportunity with video that Spotify has kind of flirted with all along. But, ultimately, it is about just competing for consumer time, regardless of the kind of content that you got to do. And not only is Spotify going to be playing that game, but I think Apple Music is there, Amazon, Pandora. Ultimately, the subscription music space is just as competitive as the video space.
And my answer would be the industry design is different. So in the music space, 80% of new music comes from two suppliers, UMG and Sony. And if you don't have one of those two, and I would actually argue you need Warner, which is like the rest, you actually don't have a business. Spotify would go out of business if it couldn't get a deal with UMG. But as Andrew probably knows, the way the record labels have structured the Spotify deals, they get a % of every Spotify dollar, even if it comes from podcasts, because they don't want to get left behind. And you actually have to, Spotify has to do a deal with those two big content suppliers, or it literally doesn't have a business model. That is not true in video. If Discovery wouldn't do a deal with you at Netflix, that was okay. You could go get CBS content. You could go get NBC content, because those content makers, there were 7 studios to begin with, and then 5, and then 4. There are plenty of places you could go and get deep library of films, Lionsgate even. You could go get film. And so you didn't need all of them to create a successful video service. And now Netflix is moving off on its own. It needs third-party suppliers like big studios less and less and less.
Rahul, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the good thing or the bad thing, however you look at it, Spotify is not competing with the music label. In the video, I'm not sure that that kind of structure or that kind of industry exists. So imagine if Netflix say, hey, Disney, let's basically, I will become, the main platform through which your products, your services will be available to customers. But Netflix itself is basically producing and providing the content. So I have no reason to believe that Disney will believe that, because, the same thing, if Sony Music said, okay, I become the platform and, somebody else come and join me, my feeling is that that will lead to all the incentive issue that we can never, kind of agree on. The good thing that Spotify did, which is it never went into producing music. And that way, every label thinks that they have a fair shot. It all depends on their music, not competing with the Spotify, not how Spotify will promote. Maybe they do some, but that is a one big difference in the music versus the movies.
I actually think what's going on in music is where we're going to end up in video, where you have software companies like Apple and Spotify competing on the user interface and recommendation systems, and content companies, labels or the programmers who make the content. And the reason I think we're going to end up that way is because ultimately that's more efficient from a consumer point of view. Okay, because consumers don't want to have to navigate between multiple interfaces when they sit down to watch something. And I think the industry will find out a way to get to that point, because ultimately that's more value for everybody to split up.
So at the end of the day, Netflix no longer produces content. And everybody else are aggregators.
You can be vertically integrated.
That's true.
We've seen that, that happens in video. That happened for a long time in video. I think there's questions about how what the advantages exactly are to that vertical integration. You've seen waves where firms vertically integrate, then they disintegrate. So if there's open questions there. But this sort of bifurcation into a bunch of separate programmers who maintain their own software and billing, I think just doesn't make sense from a consumer point of view. I don't know how long it'll take to get there, but I think it's more efficient for consumers will eventually get there.
Well, I'd like to jump in here. I would guess Andrew would too. A, I completely disagree. And B, I think at least right now, the market is going exactly in the opposite way, right? Because Netflix did used to aggregate everything. And then CBS created All Access and put more of its stuff on its own library, along with some original content like Star Trek. And then we had, I can't remember what we're up to now, but like Disney's got its own. And like Andrew said, Discovery's announced it's coming. And the more recent one that Andrew also mentioned, the Paramount's going to reintroduce sort of a big bundle with Pluto as its freemium, free tier, and then CBS All Access all the way up to pay as Showtime, which I think is a great business model. Right now, the market is doing exactly the opposite of what you're doing, what you're saying. Why? Because their pricing power is more, because video is not substitutable. And I don't think there's some overarching concern at Disney for the fact having Hulu plus ESPN plus and Disney plus is not as integrated into CBS's product line. Like, I don't think they care about the consumer, making it easy on the consumers. They want to create money, maximize the economics from IP or video that they own. So I don't see what you're suggesting is going to happening anywhere right now.
So does that mean you think what we're at now is it's a trend that will continue, or we're at some kind of sustainable equilibrium? In order to keep it reverting to something like Ali is describing. Reverting is the wrong word because it would be a different setup, but you see the current sustainable?
We have these interesting, we have third-party services like realgood.com that you go there, you put in what you pay for, and then when you put in Katharine Hepburn, it says, here's all the Katharine Hepburn movies on SVOD services you pay for, and here's where they're free on AVOD. Advertising driven on, or you put in Philadelphia Story. It says, here's all the places that you can watch Philadelphia Story. These are the ones you pay for. So I think third-party services will come in and do this, but I do not think there's economic incentive for Disney to put its stuff together with Paramount, to put its stuff together with people it directly competes with in the video space.
I think this could be a good space for me to share.
Please do it.
That shows you the subscription video marketplace, not the broader world of AVOD and all that we're talking about. This has the latest data on who's got what. And obviously you could see Netflix is sort of way ahead of the marketplace, but Disney in a very short time, thanks to the growth of Disney Plus, when you combine it with Hulu and ESPN, at least is within some striking distance. And we'll see the numbers that will be coming out probably next month to see how Disney Plus, if they're continuing to grow. But there's so many other players here. I mentioned Viacom CBS. They'll be becoming Paramount Plus at some point soon. That will do stronger. Lionsgate doesn't really get talked about much, but Starz has done okay. Information. That's why this chart is structured as it is. So then when you throw in the fact Discovery is coming into this space, I just cannot see how you're going to see all of these players with competing head to head. You simply cannot have 6, 7, 8 services competing for top dollar. I think I forgot who said it earlier, but the point about there's going to be differentiation in this marketplace. Perhaps we'll see an HBO Max become more of a comedy destination, or Peacock supported free and subscription marketplace. I think there's going to be differentiation in types of content, differentiation in pricing. The picture that you're seeing here is a market that I just don't think can continue that much longer.
And will there be consolidation among those changes?
I'd love to hear Laura tackle that one, but I certainly could see a possibility of, if you're Apple and Apple TV Plus I think it has made some progress, but clearly is not as big as, say, a Disney Plus. Could you make a massive acquisition that you take on an AT&T or a Viacom CBS, that kind of consolidation? Wow, maybe. It's hard to say. More likely, I could see an Apple TV plucking a smaller player like an MGM for its studio, or an AMC Networks for its content. So I do think you'll see some consolidation at some point. I just don't know how dramatic it's going to be.
Laura, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love this chart, Andrew. It's a little busy, but I like it. I really appreciate the fact you've updated it for the most recent numbers. So I appreciate that. So what I would say is consolidation. I think my opinion now, after the 450-page report by the Antitrust Committee, is that none of the big fangs are going to be buying anything. That if you thought you were starting a business because you were going to sell it to Google or Facebook, I think that game is over, because I think there's going to be so, like, as you see, Google Alphabet can't get its Fitbit acquisition through the EU. So I don't think they'd much rather buy tech. So I think it's going to be very hard for them to buy things without overabundance of regulatory scrutiny. So they are no longer buyers in media, in my opinion, because media assets are big. They're billions of dollars. So they don't want that attention, in my opinion. In terms of another reason I would say we're not going to have, I think Viacom and Discovery should have merged 3 years ago instead of CBS merging. So of course those should get together, and there's not going to be regulatory problems with that. Because it just means they have more negotiating leverage against Comcast and Altice and Charter. So that's a good idea if those two companies, John Malone allows it and Sherry Redstone allows it. But so that's a good idea. I think Netflix should buy CBS if it was me, because they don't have any library. They don't have that much, but the minute they did that, it would completely blow up their valuation multiples. So that's a problem for them, but they wouldn't have trouble buying stuff either. So, and from a point of view, one of the things we really need to add here is branding. Like, these companies live and die on the brands that they create. So the notion that what we're going to do if we're Disney is put our brands alongside less appropriate brands, and not somehow be in control of promoting our brands, but making them look equal to other people we compete against, not to name names. I would say, my opinion, less than 10% chance. They are control maniacs because their brand is so valuable to them. So I do not see them putting into a service for consumer convenience the ability to put Disney on an equal playing field with Peacock or Paramount Plus. Like, none of these brands can touch the Disney brand in terms of value. So I would continue to think that they will be separately managed and protected and controlled.
Ali, I feel like you should be given a chance to respond.
You do. Please rebut.
No, I don't know if we, and I totally agree. Right now, this is what I laid out is not what's happening. I think what you're saying can't happen for a long time on the cable bundle, where you had the Disney Channel and the CBS properties all coexisting on the same service. So I think we could get back there. And again, I go back to just from the consumer's point of view, when you want to sit down and watch programming, you want to be able to switch between different services in an easy manner. And I think there's a lot of value there. And I think it's important to think, make the juxtaposition again with music. Would it make sense to have music where you subscribe to the Sony Music streaming service and the Universal Music streaming service? And if it doesn't make sense there, why does it make sense in video?
Again, I feel like if there's going to be consolidation and merger, usually that takes place because the firms want to merge some assets, and those assets are valuable. So if somebody wants to take over, let's just say Netflix wants to take over Peacock, what exactly will they be getting? They will be getting, some library, some old shows, but the value is basically coming up with the new shows. That's really where the value is. And as soon as they're merged, Peacock can't make new shows. It's going to come down to Netflix making new shows, or the merger can be that they can acquire the customers. But again, acquiring customer here is also kind of silly. The customer can leave you anytime. So the merger in the traditional sense doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because I don't see what the value will be. The benefit will be if the one company goes away, but that is a different question. That's not a merger question. So for the merger to happen, the economics of that don't seem to make a whole lot of sense here.
You don't see consolidation, at least in the foreseeable future.
I don't think so.
This is sort of a related question. What exactly is Hulu now? When all of its owners go off and start their own streaming services, what is Hulu? What does it become? Does it have a future?
I would take that. And I think it's an interesting question. Now it's part of Disney. Mm-hmm. I really wouldn't be surprised after a very tortured yet somewhat successful history that 2 to 3 years from now, Hulu doesn't exist. I think there's sort of an arbitrary distinction between what goes on Disney Plus versus what goes on Hulu. There's a sense out there that Hulu is for more adult content, but Number one, I think it's a distinction without a difference, and eventually it's going to just make much more sense for Disney Plus to be the home of any kind of scripted content, no matter how adult it is. I don't buy this notion that Disney is such a sort of kid-safe brand that it can't be a little more elastic and accommodate more adult programming. Number two, Disney has made very clear in terms of international expansion that Hulu isn't getting that. And I think that's something that has hampered Hulu all along for various reasons, even pre-Disney. Disney is going to make the Star brand the place where its international expansion is going to happen. So is there any reason in an internationally focused world where Disney and Hulu and Star are all the streaming brands? I don't think so. And so I think at most you might see Hulu get tucked into the Disney Plus brand as some sort of sub-brand, kind of in a way that Hulu does itself right now with FX, maybe, but eventually these brands become like Russian dolls within each other. I don't really see there's a point. And so again, wouldn't be surprised to see Hulu go away in 2 to 3 years.
I'm happy to take the other side of that one, Andrew.
I thought you would.
So my point of view would be that Disney's core competence is marketing, and marketing starts with segmentation. And so if you can garner an extra 10% of subs because you put something in a different segment of the market and marketed it to that, that gives them benefits both in terms of individual subscriptions or this idea of a bundle. You're getting 3 services for $12.99 instead of 2, because otherwise you're going to have to raise the Disney Plus price. And so that then cuts some people out of the market that maybe could afford $6.99, but they can't afford all of Hulu, which is separately. I think it has like 30 million subs separately, paying a different $12. You can put those under. Either you're going to price discount or you're going to have to raise the Disney Plus. So I say shenanigans, leave them separate. I think they will figure out that, my opinion is they will segment all the Disney stuff, will be safe and family friendly. And that allows them to put anything that's, onto Hulu. Now that means your Avengers could go either places. So in a way, Andrew might be right that if they're putting all that sort of A+ AAA content onto Disney, Hulu becomes less impactful. But if they decided they wanted Hulu to have it, maybe they don't have the Avengers series, but they have the Captain America and Black Widow. They have the individuals over there. That's going to make it more likely that people subscribe for the big bundle of $13 a month, all of which feels to a consumer like he's getting more than for Netflix at $13 a month. So all of that to me is good marketing decisioning if you have separate targets and markets and brand them separately.
Any rejoinder? Or Rahul?
All I'll say that since the last 10 years, maybe more, Hulu has been treated like a stepchild. If you remember, Hulu was the major competition to Netflix. At the time, the studios didn't think much of that. They actually didn't want the Hulu to be successful because they thought it'll eat into their library, eat into their business, eat into their money. So they treated Hulu like a stepchild. And then eventually many of the studios went out, and now it is part of Disney. Disney has its own streaming platform. So as Laura said, the only way it can survive is either they become differentiated, or as Andrew said, that eventually Hulu is going to die.
Ali, you're in a business school. If your students were writing a case study of this industry, they get to this point now, what are sort of what are the kind of things that they would write that you'd say, no way, that couldn't happen? Or the opposite? Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
I don't know if I totally understood the question. What predictions would they make that I would say no way? Or
either what are the kinds of things you might expect people to think that this industry would do at this point if they were looking at it from a perspective that's kind of partly academic and partly real world? Not that those two things have to be different.
You're asking what my students would, you're asking what my students would predict or what I would predict? Or?
But why don't we just move on? That's okay. Let's go to a question. So we go to some of the questions. One of the issues in a traditional issue when we're talking about cable TV bundles was that they made it possible for small channels to exist, small networks like the Food Network, that they could only exist inside of these bundles. How does that work now? So I can see both sides, that on the many platforms, they have lots of places they could be. On the other hand, why does anyone need them?
Well, first of all, Food Network is not a small channel.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe not a good example.
Look,
I was smiling. I want to be a small channel like the Food Network.
Yeah, no,
the world of the truly smallest channels is going to get much more challenged in the linear cable world. But it really goes back to this question, and Laura kind of threw an interesting stat earlier about clearly the footprint of the linear cable bundle is going to shrink. And the question is how much? I think Laura mentioned the possibility of going down to something like 50 million. To me, what will determine that number is one simple thing. Who is going to own the rights to sports? Because the cable bundle, the cable business is really the sports business. As long as they could hold on to those rights, I think they could hold on to a world where 60, 70, 80 million might be all the shrinkage. If Amazon, Facebook, Google bid all those rights away over time, and I think it'll take a long time to do it, I think 50 million will be the very best they could hold on to, and it'll probably be a lot lower than that. And that becomes the world where the truly smaller cable brands will die. Although I still think, when you look at what Netflix has, when you look at what Amazon, these sort of super aggregate models, they kind of are really sort of like hundreds of little mini brands all within one thing. So it's how you define what a brand means in the future.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say the point of the channel at this stage would be basically for curation. So I think of a playlist on Spotify is really playing the same role that we should expect the sort of branded channel to play in the future. So there might be something like a Food Network, could be the current Food Network or another food-based sort of place where you navigate to see food-related programming, but it'll probably be part of a larger subscription service.
So Andrew, when you mentioned sports and how valuable it is, so sports seems like a huge winner in all of this because they've got more platforms bidding for their content. And then, so I guess, on the one hand, do all of the benefits end up accruing to sports? And then relatedly, where do things like Twitch and esports come into this? Do they compete in that same area?
Well, go back to everything is really competing with each other, and there's no reason that Twitch and esports are very much competing for time with traditional sports. Traditional sports is really at an interesting point because there was this conventional wisdom that once they were off the air for months and then sort of started coming back in the third quarter, we'd see incredible ratings for lots of different sports. And it turns out that really hasn't been the case. The NFL is I don't know, basically flat. It depends on the week that you're looking at in terms of versus year ago. The NBA and look, this is like a whole other panel to get too deep into this, but saw what I think is some significant rating slippage, though you could argue that the comparison really isn't fair. And yet, despite what I see as some troubling signs across all of sports, with regard to the vitality, with regard to the attention that casual fans want to give, I still think the value of sports rights is going to hold up pretty nicely. I don't know if it's going, we've seen sports rights for quite some time now just grow and grow like a weed in terms of value, no matter what. I think that growth will still be there. I don't necessarily know it's going to be quite on the same exponential curve because at the end of the day, even sports in decline, sports is still, the most reliable game in town, pardon the pun. It's still going to be the thing that most reliably, most regularly aggregates the best audiences in still a rapidly fragmenting world where even sports is going to see some decline.
Okay, I want to build on that. So I think what we need to add to this is sports betting,
Oh yeah.
because that's the next revenue stream that helps the sports model. So what happens is when you get betting, so they did this at Sky UK, has great examples because cricket goes 4 and 5 days. If you make a bet on how many wickets somebody's going to get, you watch all 4 days because you're counting every wicket. So in our sports, end after 3 hours. So what's going to happen next is, like, you looked at this market cap of DraftKings, which is now public. The market, my market, Wall Street, loves sports betting, the upside of it. And I think it's only legal in like 5 states. Of course, it's rolling out slowly. But what's going to happen to live sports next, it's going to make them valuable, is part of those live sports rights. They're going to sell or keep, we'll see how the rights work out, the sports betting rights. My guess is, like, the NFL will sell them to whoever buys them, and that person will be able to pay more if they're like an over-the-air broadcaster where they can get sports betting from 100% of homes that get an over-the-air signal. They should be able to bid more than a cable network, which should be able to bid more than a niche reach like the 150 million Amazon Prime people, or a niche, any kind of niche player, which would then squarely keep live sports on broadcast and cable television because there's a supplementary revenue stream.
So, so it sounds like then something that that blocks that progress are rules, state rules, I guess, mostly, that prevent gambling, right? As you said, it's only legal in 5 states. Who would lose with more sports betting? And then would you expect them to try to prevent states from allowing this?
I've actually looked a bit at this.
Mm-hmm.
There are more states than you might think. I don't have the exact count. I don't want to throw a number out there.
Sure.
Legalization is going to happen. It's a slower moving wave than its advocates would like, but in every state legislature right now, they're grappling with this, and either they've already approved it or are about to approve it, or at the beginning stages of this happening. So to me, it's a fait accompli. This is going to happen. And to sort of tack back on to Laura's point, in a world where sports loses audience and isn't as big a draw as it used to be, and that's a big question mark. I'm just saying the pandemic, it's looking a little shaky. It doesn't matter anymore, because sports with these supplementary revenue streams makes up for what may have lost in sort of a mass audience that you were trying to hit with advertising. The smaller audience is better monetized because they're doing more things, and the gambling that they're doing is something that they can take a percentage of. And how that works, who takes that percentage, a network, who's going to be the one processing the transaction. You saw a fascinating transaction earlier this year where Barstool Sports got acquired by a gambling company. That's all about seizing this incredible opportunity. So the US is going to see legalization. It's happening. It's just going to take time.
And I just want to build on one thing. I think there's a flywheel here, that they're not looking for big gamblers. They're looking at, a dollar bet if this guy's going to walk the next batter. That kind of bet is what they're going for. But the point is, it drives engagement. This whole panel is about what grabs shelf space of attention. Betting, being able to bet on a game, which makes you lean forward a little more, is good for sports. That brings people back to linear TV. That's where I go next. It brings them back to linear TV or the linear TV bundle. So I just think that, I think eMarketer is saying there'll be 60 million linear TV homes at the end of this year, down 6 or 8 million, because, like Andrew says, there's been a lot of disconnects during the pandemic. Live sports, I think, has the ability to rebuild that, because I do think they'll continue to be the highest bidders because they have the broadest reach of people that are willing to bid $1, $5, $10 a game on this or that and lean forward into that viewing experience.
So is adding gambling to this, is that actually both a producer and a consumer welfare enhancing thing, or is it taking revenues from anybody? I guess, are there any losers is the question.
Well, in an attention economy, whatever they would have been doing, like maybe TikTok's a loser, although I think they're different demos, frankly. But I do think that gaming, any kind of betting, just makes live sports more engaging than it was before if you didn't care.
I mean, I think what's going to be interesting, because Laura's right, this isn't just about the conventional idea of, big gamblers. It's about a culture shift where the average sports fan is going to start to do this because there's going to be some sort of seamless transaction on their device where it's just easy to do. And as someone who's a sports fan myself, who's not a gambler at all, I'm a little skeptical. But if the technology is there that makes it easy and I don't lose my shirt and I'm betting responsibly, maybe there's going to be tens of millions of people doing this kind of behavior in a way that they weren't today.
I want to get back to the audience questions, but before I do, and I know, Andrew, you said this is another panel, of course it is, but I'm still wondering, when sports came back or started to come back, I thought, I think a lot of people thought we were going to see great viewership numbers because people are desperate to do something, and it didn't happen. I know it's a whole other issue, but why?
Oh God. It is a complicated question. There's been a lot of writing on why is sports not as big a draw as you would expect during the pandemic. And, the easy, simple answer, I'm not saying it's the silver bullet that explains everything, is just, look, there's a lot of different things to do, as we kind of discussed throughout this panel. Video games, you could argue, has been a bigger beneficiary of pandemic consumption patterns than anything else. Fortnite, I can't believe we haven't mentioned that throughout this panel, is obviously pretty hot. And so you could argue the problem with, say, sports is that there's 90 other things to do. And also to some degree, like sports, the notion that someone, especially younger than this panel, like Gen Z, is going to pay attention to a 2 or 3 hour game may be going the way of the dodo, and that they are consuming sports, but doing it in a different, frankly, less monetizable way, where they're, they're on Snap watching a 1 or 2 minute summation about it, or they're talking on Twitter about it. And that's something the leagues are trying to grapple with. The leagues are very aggressive in terms of their presence on social platforms. Why? Because they understand demographically that younger viewers may not have the attention span to watch 2-3 hour games in the way that previous generations do. I think there'll always be a hardcore base that will tune out for that, but I do think that base will shrink as it ages.
I'd add that a lot of something that's unique is the sports came back you had the NBA finals as the same time as the beginning of the NFL season. And,
yes.
And in the background, you have an election, which is very much, two teams fighting against each other and getting huge ratings. So I think I wouldn't look at the current data from the past month or two and be pessimistic on sports going forward.
And we lost a lot of linear subs. There's 6 million fewer linear subs than before we went into COVID. So just holding ratings constant is actually like, 20% increase in the people who stayed behind, how much they're viewing.
So if I can add something, and I could be wrong, but my feeling is that the sports are so expensive for the networks to have, they basically become like a loss leader. So if NFL comes on NBC, they probably overpay for that, but they hope that people will stick around to watch the other shows. So my feeling is that this is a little bit like a cat and mouse game. If the linear TV keeps losing the audience, I'm not sure they will be having the kind of wherewithal to actually pay for the sports. So I would not be shocked if somebody like Netflix or Amazon actually bid for the sports and actually win the right. I could be wrong, but isn't an Amazon Prime broadcasting some NFL game?
Yeah, they just bought an extra wild card game. Yeah, that's correct. They have a couple and they just bought an extra wild card game at Amazon, yes.
So that's my feeling that the audience, the number of customers will play a big role that who actually wins the right to broadcast those games.
Is it still a reasonable assumption that people just stick around after whatever they were watching was on? You used to want to be after whatever the most popular show on Thursday night was. Is that still true?
I think it's less and less true.
That's what the most networks believe. I mean, that's why we show the advertisement for a bunch of their television shows in a NFL game or in a something else. The hope is that people will stick around. So a large number of people come for Super Bowl, but the next show, some of them will stick around, and that's how they will get the rating and advertising money.
Question from the audience. No one has mentioned the new Fox. What role will they play in this new world order, especially with respect to sports?
Meaning Fox, the public company, Fox A? Is that what they're asking about?
It says the new Fox.
Right. So let me try to answer that. So the new Fox is 70% news driven. The Fox News asset is 80% of their value. Okay, they wouldn't admit to that. That's my analyst assumption. But when you look at the amount of news they do on those local stations, and you look at Fox News, and you look at their monetization, FS 1 and 2, which are Fox Sports 1 and 2, are inconsequential. Would not be too strong a word in my opinion. So, I think that they drive the rights fees up for ESPN, and that's about their total take. Because if you don't like the news business, you cannot be in Fox A. They are really my opinion, a news monetization engine predominantly. That's what their stock should trade at. That's what their fundamentals are based on, in my opinion.
So, Andrew, you said we hadn't talked about Fortnite. So we should talk about Fortnite, or at least more about esports and video gaming. Where do they fit into this? Does Netflix end up having sports streaming, or does this stick with Amazon, Google, Facebook? Not Facebook, but the owners of the major streaming platforms, video game streaming platforms.
I would say Netflix is the wrong example. Netflix has shown that they're about sticking to their knitting. They don't acquire other companies. I know Laura's talked about over the years, like, why aren't they in the advertising business? They're just not that. They're just not that. I pay attention. They're just not that kind of company. But I think when you look at pretty much every other truly major big tech company, they are trying to get involved or are involved in gaming in a big way. We keep talking about Twitch. That's Amazon. Fortnite is going to be a tech power in its own right. Epic Games, its owner, is getting involved in other businesses. It's video games is something that is so massive that I think the traditionalists who sort of, like myself, cover the media and entertainment space don't understand that it is getting bigger and bigger, and that it eats into traditional video content time.
I agree. The thing I would say about Fortnite specifically is it has picked a fight with the big dog that it cannot win. You cannot win picking a fight with iOS. 40% of Americans and 15% of the wealthiest consumers on planet Earth are iOS subscribers. So when you try to end run their 30% fee, be willing to put up a fight. And frankly, nobody would have heard of Fortnite, which is literally 2.5 years old, if it hadn't been that iOS put that unknown game. It was a good game, but it gave them immediate distribution on iOS over those smartphones overnight, virtually overnight. So I agree with Andrew that where Epic Games, the parent company, is trying to go is to use tech that is real, like the Mandalorian tech is all the parent company's tech. It's $10 million an hour, but it will come down, and it's really interesting tech that they're trying to sell to media companies. My guess is that is their future more than, and then innovating on Fortnite. But when you pick a fight with Apple and now you're in lawsuits with your biggest distribution arm, like that isn't going to help your economics.
Rahul, where do esports fit into things that you've studied about video?
Yeah, last I looked at the Twitch, which is really big time into streaming the sports. And basically it's a user generated content. So people are playing, streaming, talking. But if you look at the revenues, which is really hard because they're part of Amazon, last I know that they had like a $1 billion worth of money, even though they have millions of people who go to Twitch. So the question is that in this space where the video gamers are going to a streaming platform, how do you monetize that? So my feeling is that the monetization occurs with the large sports in terms of getting some sort of loyalty, selling some sort of, the game signia, or maybe make money that way, maybe get them attracted to buy the console eventually. The money in actual streaming for those games, I'm not sure that is super economical. It has a value, like it can become quote unquote loss leader. But if you go there to make money, I'm not sure that any big company will find that beneficial.
Okay, so I can add some numbers to this because we actually do these numbers. So we think Twitch will earn 2.5 billion, which you're right, isn't a lot of money for the hours, and probably is about a third what that time would be worth in the premium video space. I would say two other things. One is that is Amazon's share of total revenue, which means it's also paying out to its content creators, 2.5 billion. And consumers have the ability to tip their favorite talent, and Amazon doesn't get a share of that. So when we think about the whole pie, it's probably between $5 and $6 billion, I would guess. And I think the more important point is you have to grab the kids if you want to hold on to them as they age up. You ignore video games at your peril. Because what's going to happen to the kids that were at Twitch, who then get accustomed to that Amazon brand, who use Amazon, now you're going to try to turn them into your consumer at 35? Like, that isn't cheaper. Even if you don't earn much money with Twitch, if you accommodate those people to your brand at Amazon, you're still going to have a lower customer acquisition cost to keep them as they age up.
So an important way incumbents can fail is by not seeing the competition coming. And even though people are talking about it and pointing out these numbers, like you said, Andrew, we tend not to pay too much attention to it. At least some of us. Are they going to have their clocks cleaned? They meaning the traditional streaming.
So, some will. I mean, when you look from a traditional Hollywood perspective, it is interesting that the intersection between gaming and entertainment, these media companies have not really been able to expand into that space in the way they probably should. And that's a trend that goes back 5-10 years at least. But what I think is also interesting is, and again, it's what makes a lot of these subjects so hard to talk about. We're talking about gaming as if it's sort of this discrete world unto itself, when really, I think you have to look at gaming and social networking and other spaces as all kind of blurred together. When you talk about Fortnite, for instance, it's not just about a bunch of people coming together and fighting each other on a platform. They're socializing, they're experiencing music content when there's concerts in the space. I believe J Balvin is the next big artist that's coming in there. There's been others like Travis Scott. It becomes a concert space. It becomes, there's a term right now, I'm glad we're getting this in, called the metaverse, which is sort of where this is all going. This notion that gaming platforms are going to be a place where it's sort of this continuous, persistent, three-dimensional social network where everyone will sort of commingle. And instead of looking at, say, two-dimensional pages with, user profiles, you're intersecting with avatars that are being, that your friends are, that you've made virtually, are all sort of playing together in a three-dimensional space where you're going to just be spending, dozens of hours, where you're going to be buying virtual goods, looking at virtual concerts. I think this is a space that's going to probably take like 10 to 20 years to really flesh out. But I do think Fortnite is pointing that this is where it's all going to go.
I think you've described every afternoon of my son these days on Minecraft with his friends.
Should be on this panel.
The way they can see each other. Yeah. So it's just 3:15, so we should I guess we should wrap up. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to speak on this panel today. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot, and I'm very grateful for your time. So thanks so much.